Welcome back to the podcast history of our world. Chapter 16, The New Kingdom Part 1, The Great House. You know the end scene in Independence Day when people around the world are celebrating the defeat of the aliens because of Jeff Goldblum's computer virus? Weird analogy, but that's kind of the mood in Egypt around the mid-1500s BC. The city of Thebes had sacrificed 2 of its leaders to stop the alien threat of the Hyksos before finally Ahmose could claim total victory. This was an extraordinary effort made possible by adapting to the enemy's war tech, promoting nationalistic fervor, and of course solid leadership. The last of the Hyksos fled into what is now Syria, and Ahmose returned home a conquering hero, joining the lofty ranks of Narmer and Mentuhotep as the great unifiers of Egypt. Sounds like a good time to retire and kick back, but no, with the Nubian gold mines back in operation, Ahmose made sure to devote time and resources to honor all of the vast pantheon of Egyptian gods for granting him the strength to succeed. They would all get their due, but Ahmose held one god in particular reverence above the rest, Amun. I sort of mentioned him before, but not in much depth. Amun, or Amen, or Amon, it's all the same, all those inscrutable vowels. Amun had replaced Montu, the war god, as supreme deity of Thebes. He's an air and wind god, whose secret and invisible presence can be felt every time a soft breeze blows by. More importantly, he's the god who Ahmose credits for his victory, and with that kind of endorsement, Amun quickly goes from a local deity to a national one, soon to be identified with Re as a major force. Talk about a promotion! Of course, it's unknown if Amun's rise was a natural byproduct of the people's will, or if it was promoted by priests of Re, eager to receive some of that sweet, sweet government funding for their temples, but either way, Egypt gets a new supremely mighty amalgamation of the two, Amun-Re. More on this later in the episode. Ahmose left behind many gifts to Egypt when he died around 1514. Freedom, monuments, art, and his son, Amenhotep I. His was a quiet reign of fighting Libyans to the west and reaching out to the big power players of the time period. Unfortunately for Amenhotep, Ahmose had inadvertently also left behind a special gift for him. Really messed up genetics. Hey, that's what you get when your parents are also siblings. Ew. Funny enough, his own health problems didn't stop Amenhotep from also marrying his own sister, but hey, it's not like this is the last time in history the royalty would keep it in the family. Ick factor aside, his family's plan to keep the bloodline pure totally backfired on them with Amenhotep, as all that incest made him as sterile as a mule. No more dynastic heirs to ensure a peaceful transition of power. They couldn't even rely on crowning a daughter as king, Amun forbid. Yet there doesn't seem to have been the same panic that occurred the last time this happened. Amenhotep's swimmers might not work, but his mind was sound. He would look outside the gene pool and adopt a worthy successor to the throne. Much like how the Roman Emperor Trajan adopted Hadrian to be his heir, Amenhotep adopted a loyal and skilled general named Thutmose to be his son and future king. And just in time, too. Amenhotep is not long for this world and dies shortly after, with Thutmose becoming king around 1493 BC. Also right on cue, rebellion breaks out in Nubia, as Kush sought to re-establish control over the region. Now just to clarify, in case anyone's still confused about the two names, Nubia is the name of the physical land south of Egypt. The name comes from the Egyptian word Nub, meaning gold, after its mines. Kush is the kingdom that rules over much of it. They'll become much more powerful later on during the 25th dynasty, but for now they're kept on the run by the Egyptians. Technically all Kushites are Nubians, but not all Nubians are Kushites. That makes sense, right? Sure it does. And later on in history, the Arab conquerors forgo this terminology and dubbed the place Sudan, meaning land of the blacks. Which is not very clever, but then again, we call it that to this day, so now you know. Well, the Nubians, or Kushites, whatever, rebel. Maybe thinking that without the line of Kamose and Ahmose keeping a tight grip on them, there was opportunity to control their own lives again. Chieftains and princes rallied their people for a war of independence. Alas for them, bad move. Thutmose was furious at this affront to his new authority and marched south not to simply restore order, but to massacre the Kushites. He didn't say it quite like that. The Egyptians like to use the verb chastise a lot, as a parent would reprimand their child. This actually reflects their worldview quite well, since they thought it was their right as the more civilized and advanced culture to keep their children, meaning anyone they conquered, obedient and calm and submissive. Except instead of a smack from the wooden spoon and go to your room, it's more like your rivers will run red with blood. Thutmose made his way to the Kushite capital at Kerma, where the rebel army engaged his troops. One of his commanders recounts what went down that day. At seeing the Nubians, His Majesty became enraged like a leopard. His Majesty shot the first arrow, which pierced the chest of his foe. His enemies fled, helpless before his uraeus. That's the cobra thing on his headdress. A slaughter was made among them, their dependents carried off as living captives. Then His Majesty journeyed north, all foreign lands in his grasp, and that wretched Nubian bowman head downward at the bow of His Majesty's ship. After he had stopped at Karnak, he proceeded to Retjenu, which is what the Egyptians called the land between Canaan and Syria, to vent his wrath throughout the land. His Majesty made a great slaughter of them. Countless were the living captives which His Majesty brought back from his victories. Basically, Thutmose sacked and razed Kerma, killed their king, and then lashed the corpse to the front of his ship, upside down. A grim message to all who would defy him. After this success, Thutmose took his troops down to the Fourth Cataract, establishing new forts before sailing downstream and bringing the Egyptian army up through Syria and to the Euphrates River. Thutmose records that aside from some skirmishes, he met little resistance. He had so much free time that he took a vacation to go hunting, slaying nearly 100 Syrian elephants. Ah, but Rob, you might say, there are no elephants in Syria. And you would be right, because we have jerks like Thutmose to thank for that. Well, he might be overcompensating for something with that, but Thutmose really had done an amazing amount of military campaigning in a short amount of time. From far southern Nubia to the fringes of Mesopotamia, Egypt was now protector of these lands, and Thutmose was their father. For nearly a dozen years, Thutmose built up Egypt's earliest attempts at empire, and more than proves his own right to be king. His death in 1481 should just mean things continue on as normal for his heir, but there's a hiccup in the succession. Thutmose, like many other kings, has a primary wife, weirdly named Ahmose, but also has other wives, like a harem. His eldest child and presumed heir was born to Queen Ahmose, but that would be Hatshepsut, his daughter. By all accounts, he loved her dearly, but gender traditions being what they were, she couldn't be next to the throne. Who even knows if they remembered that female king, Sobek-Neferu, from so many years ago? Instead, he turns to one of his lesser wives, who bore him a son, also named Thutmose, who was proclaimed king. Any concerns about his mixed lineage didn't cause too much alarm, but just to play it safe, he takes Hatshepsut, his half-sister, as wife, for 3 years, and then he drops dead. In a short amount of time as king, Thutmose II, we'll call him T2, Judgment Day, managed to produce a son with one of his harem wives named Thutmose III, who we'll call T3, Rise of the Machines. But he's just a toddler when it's his turn to take the throne, and even the traditions of monarchy have their limits. And as happens when the next in line is so young and vulnerable, any number of scheming lords and generals alike might make a bid for power. Now maybe because the kingship was so deeply ingrained into the Egyptian psyche by this point that no one did anything. Or maybe it's because Egypt was fortunate to have one of its greatest leaders step up and ensure a smooth transition of power, followed by 20 years of peace and prosperity. This would be T2's half-sister and queen, Hatshepsut, daughter of the gods. If she had been born a man, the question of authority would never have been raised. Her royal blood was purer than her husband's, and she knew it. Yet because of her gender, she was forced to play second fiddle for those 3 years of marriage before being appointed co-regent to Thutmose III, T3. In this position, she would be the young king's voice and will until he was old enough to rule on his own. Except Hatshepsut was not the demure and passive woman the court advisors hoped for. She's the daughter of the true king and queen, and a widow of the previous one. Her claim to the throne is greater than anyone else, and by Amun-Re she is going to show Egypt what a woman is capable of. Well, here's the thing. The whole gender issue bit really is kind of a big deal. Maybe not to us enlightened modern folk, but Egypt is a very traditional society, and the rules state that kingship must belong to a man. They still don't even have a word for queen as the primary ruler yet, just female king. That's really awkward. Hatshepsut could certainly proclaim herself king, but will people believe her? What she needed was a carefully orchestrated strategy to win over the hearts and minds of her people, and how she handled it is amongst the finest political theater ever devised. For starters, female king isn't going to work. What Egypt needs is a title that signifies the authority of the monarch without emphasizing their gender. Well, the term for the royal palace is per-ah, Why not apply it to the main resident as well? So from now on, instead of referring to the Egyptian monarchs as king, it's now Per-Ah, or pharaoh. A great plan, but people will eventually see her and see that the pharaoh is clearly a she. Not that she's walking around the streets of Thebes waving to people, shaking hands and kissing babies. For the times she was to be seen for royal affairs and the like, she would wear the fake beard of previous pharaohs, along with a man's skirt and the iconic Nemes headdress, thus emphasizing the masculine qualities of her role. Although then again, she also has sculptures made of her which clearly show a woman's body, and she was also fond of having her face on sphinxes. Nowadays, we tend to think of the Sphinx as female, probably a holdover from the Oedipus myth, but for ancient Egyptians, the Sphinx was a powerful male symbol. Could it be that by fusing the male and the female together, she was sending a deliberate message about the irrelevance of the pharaoh's gender? It might be. But aside from the physical makeovers, her greatest method of selling her image was through some revisionist history. Hatshepsut had the official records altered to emphasize her divine lineage and reinforce that Daddy Thutmose always wanted her to be king. As written by Thutmose I, but most likely not. "This is my daughter Hatshepsut, whom I have appointed. She is my successor upon my throne. She shall command the people in every place of the palace. It is she who shall lead you, and you shall proclaim her word. He who shall do her homage shall live. He who shall speak evil in blasphemy of her majesty shall die. Thou art divine, O daughter of a god, for whom even the gods fight, behind whom they exert their protection every day according to the command of her father, the Lord of the gods. Messing with her is messing with the gods." Her authority secure, all eyes were on her to see what kind of pharaoh she would be. Would she go after Nubia some more? Explore distant lands? Conquer some hapless tribe? Nope, none of the above. We don't have tons of information about her, but there's also no record of her starting wars. Instead, she focused on developing a robust trade network with Mesopotamia and promoted new styles of architecture and monuments. She built a tremendous funerary temple for herself close to what is now the Valley of the Kings, and also sponsored numerous temples to Amun-Re. These projects were paid for in part from those expanded trade markets, as well as a much-lauded trading expedition to faraway Punt. The Egyptian trade caravan took 2 years to complete its journey, but returned loaded with treasure. Ivory, gold, incense, exotic animals, and even live frankincense trees to replant, a big favorite of hers. Hatshepsut's 20-something years of rule was a time of stability, wealth, and culture. A welcome relief from the lean years of the Hyksos and the constant warring of the previous kings. Yet not everyone was happy, especially a certain livid teenager, furious that his destiny had been usurped by this woman. The toddler king Thutmose III had grown up in the shadow of Hatshepsut, forced to work as a priest of Amun-Re and as a palace aide, all the while being told that the throne was simply being held for him. Oh, well, you can imagine then that when Hatshepsut dies in 1458, his first order of business was a restrained and orderly transition of power. Or not, I mean, he's an angsty guy in his early 20s, and pretty resentful about instead of being king, he's had to spend his life serving his stepmom, or aunt, whatever she was. So as the newly crowned pharaoh, his first order of business was to take revenge on the deceased Hatshepsut. Statues of her were destroyed or buried, the fake beard strategically broken off. Her name was chiseled out from monuments and reliefs, and obelisks bearing her accomplishments were covered up with plaster. It was an intentional campaign to erase her from memory. He even used his position as a priest of Amun-Re to counter Hatshepsut's claims of divinity, spreading a story that he had received a personal message from the gods, crowning him king. What are the odds? Of course, the gods giveth, and the gods taketh with their gifteth. Sure, T3 was king, but no sooner had this transpired than trouble arose in the land of Canaan. The upstart kingdom of the Mitanni, a Hurrian Indo-European state out of eastern Anatolia, had thought to take advantage of the new and untested pharaoh by encouraging regional powers to push Egypt out of the area. One such power was Kadesh, a Canaanite city whose prince had gathered a bunch of friends to take over Megiddo, a vital trading destination between Egypt and the Levant. Having hostile forces in command of an essential location was not going to fly, and Thutmose was eager to pound his chest and ride for battle. With an army of 20,000 archers, slingers, spearmen, axemen, and charioteers, they made their way to Gaza, under Egyptian control, and used it as a home base. Thutmose's advisors were already having a difficult time with the excitable pharaoh, urging him to stop riding in front of the army and stay in the rear where it's safer, especially since his chariot was inlaid with electrum, a brilliant naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, and thus pretty easy to make out. Yet perhaps it was that enthusiasm to prove himself a warrior that inspired his troops to fight so zealously. There on the fields outside of Megiddo, the armies of Egypt and Kadesh met, and Egypt soundly trounced them. The enemy was beaten so badly that in their hurry to retreat, they simply abandoned their chariots and weapons on the battlefield. These survivors fled to safety behind the walls of Megiddo, and Thutmose, hopped up with adrenaline from the fighting, gave the order to pursue, but was ignored by his troops. All that unattended loot was just too good an offer to pass on, and they had their fill of plunder before finally moving on to the siege. Stone walls are hard to break through without siege weapons, and the Egyptians don't have them yet. Instead, Thutmose tries a different tactic. Build a wooden wall around the town 7 feet high and 3 feet thick. He would simply starve them into surrendering, which, while pretty nasty, works. His scribes recorded the aftermath as follows. The princes of this foreign land came on their bellies to kiss the ground before his majesty's might and to beg breath for their nostrils, because of the greatness of his strength and the extent of the power of Amun over all foreign lands. Well, kisses are nice, but what about the plunder? What does Thutmose get out of this deal? An ancient ledger reveals that amongst the items received as tribute there were 340 living prisoners, 2,041 mares, 191 foals, 6 stallions, a beautiful chariot wrought with gold belonging to the chief of Megiddo, 892 chariots of his wretched army, a beautiful suit of bronze armor belonging to the chief of Megiddo, 502 bows, 1,929 large cattle, 2,000 small cattle, 20,500 white small cattle. Whew! And that was just from Kadesh and Megiddo. Other smaller cities had to offer even more to appease Thutmose's fury. Of those cities which submitted themselves, 87 children of the chiefs who were against him, 1,796 male and female slaves with their children, non-combatants who surrendered because of famine total 2,503. Gold rings, a silver statue, 6 chairs of that foe, of ivory, ebony, and carob wood, wrought with gold. 6 large tables of ivory and carob wood, vessels of bronze, much clothing of that foe. He literally took the shirt from their backs. And now Megiddo was another addition to the Egyptian empire. T3 installed new governors in the conquered cities and built temples to the Egyptian gods. He followed up this victory with 16 additional campaigns throughout Canaan, Syria, and down the Euphrates. Every time he conquered a city, he would allow local rulers to stay on, but as representatives of Egypt. Their sons, however, would be taken as VIHs, very important hostages. They'd be looked after quite well and educated in Egyptian ways and customs, almost as if they were part of the family. But should that VIH's father decide to rebel against Egypt and cause trouble, then off with their heads. Right, Theon? This strategy actually works well, as no parent would intentionally risk their child's life. And yes, these foreign sons and daughters were eventually released back and fully indoctrinated to Egyptian society. In this way, Thutmose created a foreign ruling class not only loyal to Egypt, but fully invested in the empire. The military victories were not simply to flex Egyptian muscle, but to expand beyond the typical stomping grounds of Nubia and the Sinai. Thutmose III returns home in victory to complete his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, where he was buried in 1425 BC after a busy reign of about 25 years. Treating his predecessor poorly aside, the empire he built would last long after his death, at least through the next few pharaohs. These years are nice and boring and tranquil. Bad for history podcasts, but great for living through it. Alright, it can't last forever though. Somebody's bound to get a little stir-crazy and shake up the system. No foreign invaders or executive transvestites this time, but rather a pharaoh who had learned a shocking secret. In 1353, Amenhotep IV was new lord of Egypt, and shortly after his coronation made a startling revelation. Egypt has been worshipping false gods. The people were stunned to say the least, but there are a lot of gods in the Egyptian pantheon. Which ones in particular are those false ones? To which Amenhotep replied, all of them. Ooh, that can't be good. And next time, we explore what happens when Egypt is introduced to the Aten on the podcast History of Our World.